Hello and welcome to Trying Times. My name is Carmen, and if you're new here, then welcome. We're basically best friends now. No pressure whatsoever. I hope you're having a great day or night so far whenever you're listening to this. I hope that in general, it's been good, whatever point of the day that you're having right now. I hope it's been good. And I just want to say thank you for tuning into this episode and taking the time out to listen, because I appreciate that. So yeah, if you tuned into any of the two episodes before this one, then you'll know that this episode is basically part 3 to a series that I started. And if you didn't get a chance to check those out, then I'll do a quick recap for you. So episode 42 basically introduced this mini series that I wanted to do because it was like my birthday had just passed and I wanted to do something fun that was a little different from what I normally do on this show and do something that I found interesting. So I basically decided to create this mini series where I focus on talking about some films and shows that have recently either inspired me, maybe they've impacted me in some way, or just in general that I found fascinating. And I also talked a little bit about storytelling and how that's always been inspiring to me and a hobby of mine since a very, very young age. So I think that all is really what made me want to do this series, because generally over the course of my life, this has always been a constant for me and it doesn't really seem to be changing. Not complaining, I love it. So, I mean, clearly that's what fueled this whole idea for me. So following that episode 43 then focuses on the first of 3 shows/films that I wanted to talk about. And I won't say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it, obviously. I want you to go listen to it. But I did choose to talk about the show Never Have I Ever. So if you want to listen to that, if you're a fan of that, if you don't know anything about it, either way, I would recommend listening to it to learn a little bit more about the story and some of the things in the show that I really enjoyed. So yeah, be sure to check out that episode. It's out now. Yeah, moving along. In this episode, I'll be focusing on a film. So obviously in the last episode I did a TV series, and in this one I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about a film. And the film that I'm choosing to talk about is available on Disney Plus, and it's called Rosaline. I believe it's Rosaline. But anyways, everything from the premise of this film to each character's quirks make this film as good as it is. I don't know what the general consensus was of this film, to be quite honest with you, because I'm not a fan of doing the whole Rotten Tomatoes thing. I will look into it sometimes, but I really don't like to otherwise, because I feel like I just like to watch something and see what I think of it for myself. And if I don't like it, then that's just it really, and I carry on. And if I do like it, then that's great and we move, I guess. But if you've never heard of this film before, I'll give you a little idea of what it is. Rosaline basically is a comedic twist on the original Romeo and Juliet story, but obviously from Rosaline's perspective as opposed to Juliet's or Romeo's. So we see a total different side to the story that I feel like has never really been shared before, and that in itself is really special and interesting. It features Caitlin Dever, who is also in Booksmart, Ticket to Paradise, Last Man Standing, and so many other things, but she is genuinely just hilarious. And I feel like incredibly heartfelt in any role that she takes on. So before watching this film, I can definitely say that I felt like it was pretty promised that it would be good once I saw that she was playing the lead role. And I mean, is that biased? Yes, a little bit, because I enjoy her characters and I enjoy the way that she chooses to portray them. I think she does a really great job every time. So this was something that definitely fell in line with that, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, this is both related and unrelated. But something I've learned about myself in the last few years is that I really enjoy remakes or reboots of Romeo and Juliet more than the original. And I just want to say, no shade to the original, but I will forever love any sort of reboot of this. Okay, maybe not every single one, because that's a very big claim to make, but most of them I tend to really, really enjoy. So when I had heard of this film, I was already a little bit biased, like I said, but turns out it was well worth the bias. It was well worth the hype that I was building for myself, because I enjoyed it so much. Enough that I watched it twice. I watched it once on my own, and then I had to show my sister, and I was like, please watch this film with me. And she enjoyed it as well. So it was worth it. It was worth the hype. It was great. It was amazing. Now, similar to what I did in the last episode, where I choose to talk a little bit more about certain aspects of the programming I'm talking about, I'll be doing that with this as well. And I will basically be picking out certain things that I really enjoyed about this film. So one of the things to start that 1000% made this film the most enjoyable for me had to have been the type of comedy used throughout the story. There's obviously, since it's a retelling of a classical story, obviously they have to keep certain language and parameters very closely tied to that point in time. But the way that they changed up some of the conversation in the film and the language and the story, I love how modernized it was. I loved how funny it was, how effortless it was as well. That's a huge thing. There was just this mixture of humility, self-loathing, and then also just really pristine timing with everything here. And I think one of the biggest factors that all of the creatives on this film probably had to have taken into account, and I mean, definitely did by the looks of it, must have had to be closely tied to that need to ensure that the comedy aspect of the story didn't slip up in any moments or miss a beat. Because, again, it's a retelling of a story and they're doing it in a very comedic way, so it has to be so on all the time. And I think especially in some ways, like I said, it's a retelling. So not saying it's a parody in any way, but it can definitely be similar to a parody. So knowing that, it's so important to incorporate this in the best way possible. And I think the writers and the creatives on this film were able to do this so seamlessly. They were able to take each moment and give it as much enthusiasm as possible, which is definitely not easy. And I think especially with retelling a classic like this. So, I mean, it's always smart or potentially even safe to have some characters added into the story for that sort of comedic cushion or to provide that relief throughout a story. And there definitely were a few characters in this that were like that and easily become well-added pieces to the story as it progresses. And I don't want to say much about that because I don't want to give anything away. But generally, the comedic timing and retelling and style of communication in the film was really nicely panned out across all the characters, I think. So all in all, comedy was a huge positive in this. I would definitely say if you're looking for something funny, if you like Romeo and Juliet and you want to see a different take to it, then this is definitely what you need to watch if you haven't yet, because it was great. So the next thing I want to touch on was inclusivity. I think one of my favorite things about rebooting an older tale or a classic like Romeo and Juliet is that it can always be molded to better suit the current era that we are in now. And obviously when the story first came out, I mean, times were very different from how they are now. So I think the fact that this could be changed to be better, in my opinion, to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, to just be better in that aspect is really important. And I think generally the way that they'd done that in this film was brilliant. Like, they were definitely more reflective of that. And of course, way more inclusive of that. And again, I don't think it's easy to do this in this sort of a way, in this sort of a story. I think if someone manages to do that, it can automatically provide comfort, confidence, and like a safe space for so many viewers and so many fans. And in the last episode, I talked a lot about diversity and inclusivity within Never Have I Ever. And I'd mentioned something along the lines of not everyone being totally able to relate to what they see on screen. But if a small portion of that audience can resonate, then that matters so heavily. So I think in this film, there was a nice introduction to both diversifying the characters, more than the classic tale, obviously, and I think they did this by including characters from all types of cultural backgrounds, and even more so, they worked to include all types of people to make this as inclusive as possible. And I don't want to give a lot away about the story or the characters that I'm highlighting without blatantly saying everything, but they are very much part of the story as much as anyone else's. And I think if you're interested in watching this, like I just said a million times, I would absolutely now say go watch it. Obviously after you listen to this episode though, because I still have one more thing to go over and to share. But yeah, I think they did that in a really smooth, seamless way. So that's one more thing I really wanted to highlight in this film. And then the last thing I have to talk about is the set design, because it was insane, and I say that in the best way possible. The whole art of set design is so fascinating to me and something that I feel there's so much to learn about always, because I mean, there's so many components that go into it. There's so many artists that are behind this. There's so many creatives that are behind this. And it's just such a tedious process to make things absolutely perfect, or as close to perfect as they can be. But I think the one thing that stood out to me the most in this movie was honestly the realm of design and the way that they obviously had to make this set and certain rooms appear dated and appear relevant to the era. And it was cool to see that they managed to do that, but in also like a parody type of way, or I don't know what the other word is I'm looking for here. But it was almost like they were doing a little bit of like a parody on set design in certain ways. And at first glance, there were things that may have appeared totally on brand for the time period and, looks very original to the actual story in terms of the time it takes place within. But then you get a second look or a closer look, and it's amazing to see that they use things like wallpaper that appeared almost three-dimensional to make the walls look dated, aged, painted in a very specific way. But obviously it is done in a way where, yes, it looks relevant to that, and yes, it looks detailed and it looks well done, but it's almost like it's done in a certain way that you can really notice it if you are paying close attention to it, which I really liked. And there were certain pieces of furniture that I think absolutely needed attention as well, much deserved attention, I should say. And I think the team behind this really made careful and strategic choices to, again, suit the appropriate time period, but bring it in a comical and unique way to tie it into today's day and age, where like they could just really nicely tie the humor in this film together fully in a visual way too. So it's not just audible or obviously in a character's expression, but even things like set design in a room help to tie that together. And I think that's amazing. And one more thing I just realized I did not highlight was wardrobe. Wardrobe and costume in this movie was amazing. Just know that has a special place in my heart, because that work that any costume designer, anyone working in wardrobe does is insane. It's amazing. And all of that was so well done in this film. It ties into, again, every single character so nicely. Everything in this film complements the next element. Like every element flows together so well. So I had to mention that because I didn't get a chance to actually talk about that in depth, but everything just goes together so well. So I think that's everything I wanted to say about Rosaline. And the last thing I'll say is, again, if you are at all interested in watching this movie, then go ahead and do it. I don't think you'll regret it, to be honest. It's heartfelt, it's funny, and it's just such a great twist on a classic, so you can't really go wrong with that. So, yeah, that's the second show/film I wanted to talk about in the series, and I'm excited as we get closer to the final episode to share one more piece that I really love. But for now, if you want to talk more about this film or even have a recommendation, then feel free to DM me on Instagram at the Trying Times Podcast, or leave me a voicemail by clicking on the link in the episode description. And yeah, that's everything for me today. So we'll talk again soon, okay? Bye.